Allied commanders were stunned by what German U-boats did in the first months of 1942. Section 1. Blackout on the American coast. January 14, 1942. Off the coast of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. The sea is calm, almost deceptively so, rolling in long, slow swells beneath a winter moon. On the bridge of the German submarine U-123, Captain Lieutenant Reinhard Hartigen lifts his binoculars and stares toward the American shoreline. What he sees makes him hesitate, just for a moment. The coast is lit up. Hotels glow like beacons. Streetlights trace the curve of the land. Cars move along coastal roads, their headlights unmasked, uninterrupted. It looks like peacetime. Inside the pressure hull, diesel engines thrum softly, their vibration traveling through steel plates into the bones of the men below. The air smells of oil, sweat, and stale tobacco. Hartigen lowers the binoculars slowly. This is not what Berlin expected. This is more than opportunity. This is an invitation. Barely a month earlier, on December 11, 1941, Adolf Hitler had declared war on the United States. In response, Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of Germany's U-boat arm, had moved with ruthless speed. He called the operation Unternehmen Paukenschlag, Operation Drumbeat. The goal was simple and audacious. Strike the American coast before the United States Navy could organize its defenses. Now, as U-123 slips silently through coastal waters, that gamble is paying off faster than anyone in the Kriegsmarine dared hope. Hartigen orders the boat to periscope depth. The electric motors whisper to life, replacing the diesels. Men move with practiced precision, their faces pale in the red glow of battle lights. At the periscope, Hartigen scans again. There, silhouetted against the bright shoreline, is a tanker moving steadily north. Unescorted, unzigzagged, a civilian ship following a routine schedule in a war it has not yet learned to fear. Torpedo eins, Hartigen says quietly. The weapon slides from the tube, a compressed hiss followed by silence. Second stretch, then the night erupts. A pillar of flame shoots skyward as the tanker's cargo ignites, lighting the sea like a sunrise. The concussion thumps against U-123's hull. On deck, sailors on the doomed ship run, their figures briefly visible before smoke swallows them whole. From shore, people watch. In beach houses and hotel balconies, Americans see the explosion clearly, some mistaking it for an accident, others for distant thunder. Few understand that they are witnessing the opening shots of one of the most devastating naval campaigns in their history. In Washington, the Atlantic still feels far away. The shock of Pearl Harbor dominates every briefing, every map, every argument between admirals and generals. The Pacific is bleeding, and Europe seems secondary. The United States Navy, stretched thin and inexperienced in anti-submarine warfare, has not yet implemented a full coastal convoy system. Coastal blackouts are debated, delayed, resisted by local governments worried about tourism and commerce. The ocean remains illuminated, and the shipping lanes remain predictable. For Donitz, this is everything he hoped for. Between January and February 1942, just 5 long-range Type 9 U-boats patrol the American coast. 5. They are supposed to be harassed, hunted, forced to withdraw. Instead, they roam almost freely. Each night, they surface close to shore, charging batteries beneath glowing skylines, their silhouettes invisible against the lights behind them. Each day, they sleep on the seabed, listening to distant propellers and the occasional, ineffective patrol. Hartigen is not alone. Captain Lieutenant Ernst Kals in U-130, Heinrich Zimmermann in U-136, and other commanders report similar success. Ships burn off Florida. Tankers explode near New Jersey. Wreckage washes ashore with alarming regularity. Oil slick stained beaches where families still walk in the afternoon sun. The numbers begin to climb with terrifying speed. By the end of January, dozens of Allied ships have been sunk in American waters. February is worse. March becomes catastrophic. Merchant captains, many of them civilians with minimal wartime training, sail into what has effectively become a shooting gallery. Radios crackle with distress calls that go unanswered. Lifeboats drift for days. Survivors watch the coastline pass them by, close enough to see, too far to reach. Inside you, 123, Hartigan records each kill with methodical precision. He knows history is being written, even if his enemies do not yet understand it. Each torpedo fired is another blow against Allied logistics, another shock waiting to be felt in command rooms far from the sea. And somewhere in the United States Navy, buried beneath paperwork, miscommunication, and denial, the first uncomfortable realization is beginning to form. The war has come to America's doorstep, and no one was ready. Section 2. Operation Drumbeat Unleashed. January 23, 1942. Berlin, headquarters of the Befehlshaber der Unterseeboot. Karl Donitz stands over a large Atlantic chart, its surface crowded with grease pencil markings. Each red symbol represents a sinking. Each date beside it marks another day the Americans failed to react. As reports arrive from the boats, his staff officers exchange glances that border on disbelief. This is not how coastal waters of an industrial superpower are supposed to look in wartime. Donitz had not expected this level of success. Before Drumbeat began, he had warned the Naval High Command that the operation was a gamble. Germany lacked sufficient long-range submarines. Supply lines were stretched. There would be no forward bases, no air cover, no immediate rescue if a boat were damaged. The Americans, he assumed, would learn quickly. They did not. Instead, U-boat commanders described conditions eerily reminiscent of 1917. Ships sail alone, silhouetted against illuminated shorelines. Harbor entrances blaze with navigation lights. Radio discipline is poor. Distress calls are transmitted in the clear, often revealing precise positions. Worse still, many American patrols lack sonar entirely. Some carry depth charges but do not know how to deploy them effectively. Donitz approves reinforcements immediately. More Type 9 boats are diverted from the Central Atlantic and Caribbean routes. The second wave of Drumbeat begins. By early February, German submarines are operating from Newfoundland to the Gulf of Mexico. Captain Lieutenant Werner Hartenstein in U-156 pushes deep into the Caribbean, sinking ships off Aruba and Trinidad. Oil installations burn. Tankers loaded with Venezuelan crude explode in tropical waters, their flames visible for miles. British and Dutch colonial authorities plead for protection that does not exist. In the United States, confusion reigns. Rear Admiral Adolphus Andrews, commander of the Eastern Sea Frontier, knows something is wrong. His daily situation reports grow longer, darker, more urgent. He requests aircraft, escorts, radar-equipped patrol vessels. Washington responds slowly, cautiously, constrained by competing priorities and an ingrained belief that American coastal waters cannot be as vulnerable as the reports suggest. Some senior officers remain skeptical. They argue that sinkings are exaggerated, that U-boats cannot operate so freely so close to shore. Others insist the answer lies in offensive sweeps rather than defensive convoys. The word convoy itself carries uncomfortable echoes of British losses earlier in the war, lessons many American planners had not fully absorbed. Meanwhile, the merchant marine pays the price. On February 18th, the tanker RP Reser is torpedoed off New Jersey. Her crew abandons ship as flames engulf the deck. The explosion lights up the coastline, drawing crowds to the beach. Some spectators bring binoculars. Others take photographs. Lifeboats drift past the surf while the wreck burns behind them. Inside U-boat control rooms, commanders listen calmly to the sounds of destruction they have unleashed. They hear secondary explosions, rupturing boilers, collapsing bulkheads. They mark positions, reload tubes, and move on. The psychological impact is profound. Survivors report seeing submarines surface openly, even tauntingly. One captain claims he watched a U-boat crew eating dinner on deck while a ship burned nearby. Whether true or not, the story spread rapidly through ports and shipping companies. Sailors begin refusing assignments. Insurance rates skyrocket. Many citizens do not realize how close the enemy truly is. Donitz, however, understands exactly what is happening. In a private assessment, he notes that the Americans are repeating all the mistakes of 1917. He orders his commanders to press the advantage while it lasts. He knows it will not last forever. But for now, the Atlantic belongs to the hunters. And far from the burning coastlines, Allied commanders are finally beginning to grasp the scale of the catastrophe they have allowed to unfold. Section 3. Blind Waters and Broken Assumptions. March 5, 1942. Washington, D.C. Navy Department. The room smells faintly of cigarette smoke and damp wool coats. Maps of the Atlantic cover the walls, now crowded with pins and grease pencil marks that were not there a month ago. Red dots creep closer and closer to the American coastline, clustering in places that should be safe. Chesapeake Bay, Cape Cod, the Florida Straits. Each dot represents a ship gone, a crew scattered or dead. Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Harold Stark listens in silence as another briefing concludes. The language is careful, almost clinical, but the meaning is unmistakable. The situation is deteriorating faster than anticipated. Sinkings are accelerating, not slowing, and the measures in place are failing. At sea, the failure is painfully obvious. American anti-submarine patrols are flying blind. Many aircraft assigned to coastal defense are obsolete trainers hastily refitted with depth charges. Pilots receive minimal instruction in submarine detection. Radar sets are scarce, and where they exist, crews are unfamiliar with their operation. Sonar, still referred to by its early designation ASTIC, is in short supply and often poorly maintained. Worse still, there is no coherent system tying these elements together. Ships sail independently, each captain left to his own judgment. Some zigzag, many do not. There are no standardized routes, no scheduled rendezvous, no protective screens of escorts. British officers, quietly observing, recognize the pattern immediately. They have seen this movie before, and they know how it ends. But American naval culture resists the lesson. Convoys are viewed as inefficient, even dangerous. Concentrating ships, some argue, simply creates larger targets. Others insist that aggressive hunter-killer patrols will keep the U-boats at bay. The fact that these patrols rarely find anything does little to shake that confidence. Out at sea, German commanders exploit every weakness. In U-66, Captain Lieutenant Richard Zapp maneuvers close enough to shore to smell land. He attacks at night, on the surface, using speed and darkness rather than stealth. Against a backdrop of illuminated cities, his boat is nearly invisible. Torpedoes strike with mechanical regularity. Each sinking is followed by a brief pause, a listening watch, then movement toward the next victim. Radio intelligence compounds the disaster. American merchant ships transmit distress calls immediately, often repeating them multiple times. U-boat radio operators intercept the signals with ease, plotting positions, predicting rescue routes. What is meant as a plea for help becomes a roadmap for further destruction. The Caribbean, once thought too distant and complex for sustained submarine operations, becomes a killing ground. In March alone, German U-boats sink ships off Curaçao, Aruba, and the Yucatan Channel. Refineries burn. Oil production falters. Allied planners begin to feel the consequences not just in lost ships, but in fuel shortages and disrupted supply chains. Behind closed doors, tempers flare. British naval officers, attached to American commands as liaisons, press harder. They bring data, charts, hard-earned experience from 2 years of brutal Atlantic fighting. Convoys work. Blackouts matter. Air coverage must be coordinated. The resistance they encounter is polite but firm. Admiral Ernest King, newly appointed Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet, is a formidable presence. Brilliant, abrasive, and deeply skeptical of British advice, he believes the U-boat threat is being overstated. His focus remains divided between the Atlantic and the Pacific, where Japan continues to advance. Yet even King cannot ignore the numbers forever. By the end of March 1942, nearly 300 ships have been lost since the beginning of the year. Tankers, freighters, passenger vessels. Thousands of sailors are dead or missing. Insurance underwriters warn of catastrophic economic consequences if losses continue. Port authorities report crews refusing to sail. Public pressure begins to mount despite censorship. Newspapers along the coast publish stories of burning ships visible from shore. Photographs leak. Questions reach Congress. And beneath it all lies a growing, uncomfortable truth. The enemy has not outsmarted the Allies with superior technology or overwhelming numbers. He has succeeded because the door was left open, because old lessons were ignored, because the war was underestimated. In Berlin, Donitz senses the shift coming. Success breeds attention, and attention breeds countermeasures. He urges his commanders to strike hard while the Americans still stumble. The window is closing, but it is not closed yet. Section 4. The tide turns in Washington. April 10th, 1942. Washington, D.C. The mood inside the Navy Department has changed. The easy confidence of January is gone, replaced by fatigue and a growing sense of urgency that no one bothers to disguise anymore. Reports now arrive faster than they can be filed. Each morning briefing begins with a tally of ships lost overnight, and each tally is worse than the last. Admiral Ernest King sits rigid at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. For months, he has resisted what he views as British alarmism. Now the evidence is undeniable. The sinkings are not isolated incidents. They're a campaign, and the campaign is succeeding. King is not a man given to public admissions of error, but privately, his position shifts. He orders a comprehensive review of coastal defense procedures. Escort availability, air patrol coverage, port security, training standards. The findings are damning. The Eastern Sea frontier is undermanned and under-equipped. Many destroyers are still assigned to convoy duty in the North Atlantic or diverted to the Pacific. Patrol aircraft lack depth charges or fly without radar. Coordination between Navy, Army Air Forces, and civilian authorities is inconsistent at best. Even something as simple as coastal blackouts has become a bureaucratic quagmire. Local governments resist turning off lights, fearing economic damage and public backlash. Resort towns lobby aggressively. Power companies complain. The Navy pushes back, arguing that every illuminated mile of coastline is a targeting aid for German submarines. The argument drags on while ships continue to burn offshore. At sea, the cost of delay is measured in lives. On April 16th, the tanker Gulf America is torpedoed just miles off the Florida coast. Flames rise hundreds of feet into the air. Debris rains down near Palm Beach. Survivors cling to wreckage as tourists gather on the shore, watching the inferno like a spectacle. Newspapers can no longer suppress the reality. The enemy is visible. The war is no longer abstract. That same week, King authorizes the gradual implementation of escorted coastal convoys, beginning in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. It is not a full system yet, but it is a start. British advisors, quietly vindicated, assist in planning routes and schedules. The learning curve is steep and unforgiving. Escort vessels are scarce. Many are converted yachts, trawlers, or aging destroyers pressed into service. Crews train on the move, learning sonar procedures and depth charge attacks while actively escorting merchant ships. Mistakes are frequent. Contacts are misidentified. Charges are dropped too deep, too shallow, or not at all. German U-boat commanders notice the difference almost immediately. Ships begin sailing in groups. Courses are less predictable. Air patrols appear more frequently, forcing submarines to dive during daylight hours. Attacks become riskier, more hurried. Some boats report near misses from depth charges that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. Donitz is not alarmed, but he is attentive. He understands that the Americans are waking up. He orders continued pressure, but warns his commanders to be cautious. Losses among the U-boats have been minimal so far, but that balance can shift quickly. The history of the Atlantic has shown him That unchecked success invites disaster. By late April, the sinkings begin to level off in certain areas. Not stop, but slow. This catastrophe was not inevitable. It was allowed to happen. And as May approaches, the battle off the American coast enters a new, more dangerous phase for both sides. Section 5. Learning Under Fire. May 3, 1942. Gulf of Mexico, south of the Mississippi Delta. The convoy moves slowly through the gray morning haze, a loose formation of tankers and freighters stretching across the horizon. At their edges, small escort vessels churn the water, their crews tense, eyes fixed on sonar screens and the empty sea ahead. This is no longer the careless procession of independent sailings that defined the early months of the year. This is something new, imperfect, and hard-earned. Below the surface, a German U-boat tracks them cautiously. The commander listens through headphones as sonar pings echo faintly through the water. The sound is unfamiliar, intrusive, and persistent. It is not yet deadly, but it is no longer ignorable. He realizes, with a tightening in his chest, that the Americans are learning. Slowly, painfully, but they are learning. Across the Atlantic, Admiral Donitz studies loss reports with growing concern. The tonnage figures remain impressive, but the trend is shifting. Attacks now require more patience, more maneuvering, more risk. U-boats are being forced deeper and held down longer by air patrols that seem to appear with uncomfortable timing. The Caribbean, once a playground for German submarines, is becoming crowded with patrol aircraft. Army Air Forces B-18s and Navy PBY Catalinas crisscross shipping lanes, their crews finally trained to recognize periscope wakes and oil slicks. Depth charges explode closer now, sometimes close enough to rattle valves and crack fittings. On May 6th, U-157 fails to return from patrol. There is no distress call, no wreckage, just silence. It is the first undeniable sign that the balance of risk is changing. In Washington, Admiral King authorizes further expansion of the convoy system. Coastal routes are formalized, schedules standardized, escort assignments prioritized. The Gulf and Caribbean take precedence, recognizing the strategic importance of oil shipments. Tankers that once sailed alone now wait days in port for convoy assembly, frustrating shipowners but saving lives. The change ripples outward. British and Canadian escorts reinforce American formations, bringing experience forged in years of Atlantic combat. Training accelerates. Sonar operators drill relentlessly. Air and sea units practice coordination, learning how to box in a submerged submarine, how to force it into mistakes. Not everything works. Some convoys still suffer losses. U-boats adapt, shifting patrol areas, exploiting gaps in coverage, striking at the edges of formations. But the days of effortless slaughter are ending. For the merchant sailors, the difference is palpable. The sea is still dangerous, but it no longer feels abandoned. Escorts answer radio calls. Aircraft appear overhead. Rescue is possible. Morale improves, cautiously, unevenly, but unmistakably. German commanders feel the pressure most acutely at night. Surfacing to recharge batteries has become hazardous. Radar-equipped aircraft roam the darkness, their presence betrayed only by the sudden glare of flares and the rush of wind as bombs fall. Submarines spend more time submerged, draining batteries and exhausting crews. Patrols grow shorter. Returns to base are greeted not with celebration, but with quiet acknowledgement of survival. By the end of May 1942, the statistics tell a clear story. Sinkings along the American coast have dropped sharply. Losses in the Gulf persist, but even there, the curve is bending downward. The Americans have not achieved mastery of anti-submarine warfare, but they have denied the U-boats their freedom. For Allied commanders, the lesson is searing. This was not a victory wrested from a stronger enemy. It was the recovery from a self-inflicted wound. The cost of delay is written in the names of hundreds of ships and thousands of dead. For Donitz, the campaign has reached its limit. Operation Paukenschlag has achieved its purpose, but the window has closed. He begins shifting focus back to the mid-Atlantic, where convoys are still vulnerable and air cover remains thin. The battle off America's coast is not over, but it will never again be so one-sided. Section 6. The Reckoning at Sea. June 18, 1942. Mid-Atlantic approaches, east of Bermuda. The ocean is darker here, deeper, and far less forgiving. The coastline that once betrayed American complacency has fallen behind the U-boats. Ahead lies the familiar killing ground of the Central Atlantic, where convoys stretch thin and air cover fades beyond the reach of land-based patrols. For donuts, this is where the real battle must continue. Yet even here, the war has changed. The convoy moves under a low ceiling of clouds, its escorts weaving constantly, their sonar operators alert to every echo. Radar sets hum softly in the darkness. What was experimental in April has become routine by June. The Americans have absorbed the lessons of drumbeat with startling speed. Below the waves, a German commander weighs his options. He knows the escorts are better trained now. He knows the margin for error is smaller. One wrong move, one misjudged approach, and the sea itself will turn against him. The days of surfacing near the American coast, batteries full and targets silhouetted by city lights, feel like a different war entirely. In Berlin, Donuts briefs his superiors with characteristic candor. He emphasizes the success achieved earlier in the year, but he does not disguise the cost. U-boat losses are increasing. The enemy's countermeasures are improving. He requests more submarines, better equipment, greater production. The response is sympathetic but constrained. Germany's resources are finite, and demands multiply on every front. Back in Washington, Allied commanders conduct their own reckoning. The Atlantic crisis of early 1942 becomes a case study almost immediately. Reports circulate through naval colleges and planning staffs, dissecting failures and reforms with brutal honesty. Poor coordination, cultural arrogance, delayed adaptation. The conclusions are unflattering, but they're necessary. Admiral King, never inclined towards sentiment, focuses on results. Convoys work. Air coverage matters. Training saves ships. The doctrine hardens into policy. For the men at sea, the war grinds on. Convoy escorts chase contacts that vanish into thermal layers. Aircraft circle oil slicks that may or may not mark a submarine's path. U-boats attack when they can, withdraw when they must. The balance tilts not through a single dramatic engagement, but through countless small decisions, each one favoring the side that learns faster. By July 1942, the numbers confirm what sailors already feel. The catastrophic losses of the winter and spring have ended. Sinkings continue, but at levels that can be absorbed. Oil flows again. Cargoes move. The Atlantic lifeline, bruised and battered, holds. Operation Paukenschlag is officially over. For Donuts, it remains one of the most successful submarine campaigns of the war, a demonstration of what surprise and unpreparedness can yield. For the Allies, it is a warning etched in fire and steel. The enemy does not need overwhelming strength to win. He only needs opportunity. And opportunity, once given, is rarely forgiven. Type TEEP to generate the next section. Section 7. The Lessons Written in Wreckage. July 30th, 1942. Naval War College, Newport, Rhode Island. The classroom is quiet except for the scratch of pencils and a low murmur of officers reading reports. On the table lie photographs of wrecked hulls, charts marked with sinking locations, transcripts of radio messages intercepted too late. This is no theoretical exercise. Every document represents men who sailed and did not return. The Atlantic disaster of early 1942 is now formalized into doctrine. Instructors dissect the campaign from first contact to final adaptation. They speak of failure without euphemism, the absence of coastal blackouts, the refusal to implement convoys, the fragmentation of command. These were not technological shortcomings. They were human ones. Out at sea, the consequences of those lessons are already visible. Escort groups operate with growing confidence. Radar-guided interceptions become more frequent. Sonar attacks grow more aggressive and coordinated. Depth charge patterns tighten. Air patrols extend farther from shore as new bases come online. What was once a patchwork defense has hardened into a system. German submarine morale inside the U-boat arm begins to shift. The early months of 1942 have been intoxicating. Young commanders return to base as heroes, credited with sinkings that dwarfed anything achieved since 1918. Now patrols end quietly, sometimes in failure, sometimes not at all. Lost notices arrive with unsettling regularity. Donitz addresses this directly. In speeches to returning crews, he emphasizes duty and endurance. He praises their achievements, reminds them of the strategic necessity of their mission. Privately, he acknowledges the truth. The enemy has adapted faster than expected. The easy phase of the war is over. For Allied commanders, the reckoning carries a different tone. There is relief, but no triumph. The cost has been too high for celebration. Over 600 ships lost in the first 7 months of 1942. Tens of thousands of sailors dead or missing. Supply chains disrupted at a moment when global war demanded maximum output. The realization settles in with heavy clarity. This catastrophe was preventable. That understanding shapes everything that follows. In later crises, from the Arctic convoys to the Normandy buildup, the memory of Drumbeat lingers. It informs decisions. It sharpens instincts. It leaves little tolerance for complacency. Along the American coastline, the lights remain dimmed. Blackouts become routine, accepted, enforced. The glow that once guided U-boats to their prey fades into darkness. Beach towns adapt. Tourism suffers, but shipping survives. And beneath the waves, the Atlantic resumes its long, brutal equilibrium. No side holds it uncontested. No mistake goes unpunished for long. Operation Paukenschlag ends not with a decisive battle, but with understanding. Understanding paid for in wreckage. That modern war offers no sanctuary. Not distance. Not optimism. Not denial. Only preparation.